Hello, ethics students and anyone else interested in learning about Kantian deontology. I'm Dr. Shannon Bowen, and I want to review just briefly a model that I created in 2004, published in the Journal of Public Relations Research. It gives us an overview of how Kantian deontology can be applied in issues management, which is the executive problem-solving function of public relations, or in the strategic management process as a whole. So this is the model, and it is a very theoretical model based on moral philosophy, so it's not very wordy. I wanted to give you just a little context. Values is the beginning of the model because we have a context of values, whether we're working with an organization or a client or even on a societal level, that predicts in a way what we're going to consider important. Most organizations have codified those values into some type of value statement, a mission statement, vision statement, and so on. And that provides a context for your business decisions and informs your strategy. So we want to look at issue identification next. Issue identification is an ongoing process of boundary spanning and environmental scanning in which you're seeking to identify any problematic issue before it becomes a crisis. So the earlier the better, and that's why we have input from the environment, which is this dotted line on the right. We need input from internal and external publics of various kinds. All of our stakeholders can have something to do with issue identification, and we have to be listening to the larger context from which issues arise as well. So monitoring your complaint phone lines, looking at email complaints, looking at the rate of product return, talking to your suppliers and your distributors about availability of raw goods, talking to your wholesalers and retail outlets, as well as ongoing conversations with publics inside the organization. Oftentimes your employees are your most overlooked asset, so keep that in mind as a way to identify issues as well. Going back to the philosophy, we now see that we have three forms of moral philosophy splitting into their large categories. This model does not deal with materialism, which is the pragmatic approach of prudential self-interest or egoism, doing what's best for the decision maker alone. And that's over here. It exits the model. And it does not deal with utilitarian theory, which is doing that which serves the greatest good for the greatest number of people or the majority of folks affected by a decision. That is not represented in this model, so it exits as well. Moving forward, we then only deal with deontology, so looking in depth at this ideal and normative moral philosophy posed by Immanuel Kant in roughly 1764. A number of publications, a tremendous body of knowledge exists on his work in deontology around that time period. So, looking at deontology, we're trying to reveal what the universal moral principle underlying a decision is. So we have to do a lot of examination, and that is based on research, which is again that two-way arrow coming back to the top of the model and the other two-way arrows nearer the bottom, engaging in research, both formal and informal social scientific research, and dialogue with publics to gain their perspective about an issue. So we're looking for what duty indicates is the right thing to do. But first we have to engage the law of autonomy, meaning check yourself and make sure that you are an objective and deliberate moral decision maker. Being as objective as you can possibly be, meaning that you're not influenced by the outcome of the decision, you're not seeking a certain consequentialist outcome or monetary gain. You're not biased in the decision-making platform. You're not afraid to make the right decision by fear of retribution from a supervisor or a client, etc. So you feel morally free to weigh the rational merits of the ethical situation and determine what you're going to do based on reason alone. That underlies all of Kantian philosophy. Once you've done that, now we pose the categorical imperative. The categorical imperative asks us to make a universal decision that upholds the moral law and is based on moral principle alone. And there are three specific tests within the categorical imperative that tell us how to do that. The first test in the middle here is the test of duty, or the universal moral norm. That is to act on that maxim that you could will at the same time to become a universal law in all similar situations and for all time. So the decision applies now and in the future and in the past and on other planets. If we had a colony on Mars or even an alien civilization, they would be obligated to do the same thing that you are about to do because you're that certain that it's ethical. Now, it's important to understand with the three tests of the categorical imperative, Kant says that we have to have all three tests answered affirmatively before a decision can be deemed ethical. So the universal relationship of yourself and everyone else being obligated to do what you're about to do, that's the first test, Form 1. Form 2 is the dignity and respect form of the categorical imperative. That's also known as the humanity form, and it says act in such a way that you treat humanity always as an end in and of itself, meaning that you're not using people as a means to an end. You're respecting them as worthy ends and moral beings independent of any consequence. Because they exist as a rational decision maker, that means we are all equal regardless of social status, affluence, education, etc., because we're all rational decision makers. So you have to incorporate the ideas of others and think about their perspective on a problematic issue. How would it be viewed using empathy and moral sensitivity, as well as using your rational thought process to understand from their perspective what their desires would be in an issue? And of course, you can ask interested parties. You are supposed to use research and every means that you can to inform your moral decision making. The third and final form of the categorical imperative is the highest ethical bar to meet, and that is the standard of good intention and the morally good will. So you should act only from a maxim which you could will to become a universal moral norm in the kingdom of ends, where everyone does the right thing all the time and all decisions are driven by moral goodwill and intention alone. So Kant says that intention is the only morally worthy thing that should drive a decision, not self-interest, not prudence, not egoism, not even things we would consider innately good in some respects like courage, because they can be overdone. So in and of itself, a priori, goodwill or good intention is the only thing that exists without too much or too little of it tainting the decision. It's good in and of itself. So if your ethical test, or whatever your decision option is, passes the ethical test of all three forms of the categorical imperative, you can be relatively certain that it is ethical. Move forward with your symmetrical model, your give and take dialogue and feedback from publics, testing what they think about the decision and if they have any way to improve the decision alternative as well, if it meets their needs. You don't have to accommodate or acquiesce, but you do have to discuss and understand the views of others. You can make your decision based on merit and rational reasoning rather than what people want or what they desire or the strength of that desire. Do what the moral law upholds. And in that way, you're only loyal to the truth and to the moral law. Now, sometimes it is hard to gauge other people's intentions, but there are a few things that you can look for to help you assess intentions. Do their actions meet their language? Do they say one thing and then do another, or do they actually follow through with actions? Have you been able to give feedback, or have they listened for feedback? If it's a case study where you're trying to assess intention, did they do research? Did they seek feedback from others, including those that don't agree with their position? That would indicate that they have good intention. And then finally, do they follow up? Is it an ongoing process where they want to incorporate the ideas and perspectives of others? Or is it a top-down decision-making process? We've made the decision, our stakeholders will have to accept it. that obviously is not moving forward with good moral intention. So the idea here is to use the symmetrical model to talk about these things, to do research on them, social, scientific, and informal research, management by walking around and talking to your stakeholders and publics, to incorporate their ideas and their desires and their perspectives rationally and thoughtfully in the decision-making process as you reason through what the correct thing is to do in a situation. If you do all of that, the result is ethical issues management in an ongoing process of dialogue and strategic management for your organization. If you do follow through with this normative model, your decisions will be much more rigorous and analytical than if you use a gut instinct or seat of the pants or even experience approach. And these decisions will also be more defensible than if you had not used a rigorous analytical means of moral philosophy. So I hope that this helps you understand deontology, and I hope that Immanuel Kant's philosophy now is not so foreboding to you. It is eminently practical, as you'll see in my next video. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.